call this meeting of CPDC to order. And
can do the spiel, but there's nobody to spiel to. I can still give it.
Not even online?
Nope.
Just even.
all right, well then we'll move along.
Right.
Do we want to go in order
I think
as
so.
it is on the agenda?
Yeah.
Okay.
Motion to continue 413 Main Street, McDonald's USA to December 11th.
Second.
No specific time, just we're good. All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
We're all together.
Nice here.
Probably share the next motion on the screen for somebody.
I'm gonna bring up Shoot Street right now.
We can do that out of order if you guys want.
Well, I figure get all the business out of the way.
Yeah.
And then executive session.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
works. Yeah, let's do that. So, the applicant or developer for the 6-16 Shoot Street has requested a year-long extension from their approval period. So they were approved in March of 2022, and typical site plans in 40Rs is the 2-year time period to get your building permits in place for you to move forward with the project and have it be valid. Their 2-year period expires in March 2024. They're just being proactive in the light that they don't make that deadline to receive their building permit because they are working through some back of end stuff like their tenants' rights, their financing, and other things like that they're still working through. So they wanted to get out ahead of the game and request a year-long extension from March 2024 deadline to March 2025. And again, that's the property down at Shoot Street, 6-16 Shoot Street. Happy to take any questions.
For those of us that weren't here at that point, what is the project? What does it involve?
The project is a 40R mixed-use development application to redevelop the existing structure and parking lot into a 4-story, 29-unit, X amount of square feet on the first floor and parking on the ground level as well in the rear of the building. With 20% affordable, I think it was 8 affordable units in it.
And if we don't approve the extension and they don't start the project, we start over again?
It's probably a bit more trickier than that. They do still have some rights, but likely they would need to seek the building permits just to, on their own end, be sure, or alternatively, yes, likely reapply and try to restart a hearing process.
Right, I'll say from what I've seen, is that it is the bar for establishing progress is pretty low, so they would likely be able to if we don't approve it, they'll likely be able to do something that would be considered
There's
continuing.
some gray area in the language, which
Yeah.
mostly relates to appeal periods, but there is language about them doing their due diligence and working on their end to actively seek the permits, which between the economic development director and I, we've had conversations with the owner and they are actively trying to get there. It's just the deadlines and hearings for them and their, back litigation is taking time, so they're working through those things.
Could have imagined.
Right, and the litigation that they're dealing with has nothing to do with the plan, just for clarity.
If they do request a building permit, how How long is the building permit valid, assuming they don't do any work?
That's a good question. Building permits are valid. I would prefer to double check that info. I want to say it's a year or two before expiration. There is an expiration period if you don't act on it. Same thing with the demolition permit that
Mhm.
would be required for that site. I don't know the exact time frame off the top of my head.
Okay.
Other discussion?
I don't have
comment?
questions or comments on that.
Yeah, I will say, I'm not all that anxious to grant an extension for then something that, right, could just like.
Sit there for,
Right,
for
yeah,
years
yes,
in
yeah,
a semi-state.
yeah,
So
that doesn't help
No.
anyone, right? The community, the neighbors, the existing tenants, anyone.
So maybe I
Um,
just need to make sure I understand, if we grant a 1-year extension, does that mean construction, cause the letter says, does that mean construction has to start in another year, or just that they have the building
they have to get
permits?
a building permit within that time frame. And to answer your previous question, Tonya, on a quick Google search, a permit is issued, you have 6 months to start construction, and you may request a 6 months extension from that. So you can get a building permit, and then there can be up to a year period before real active construction really takes place.
I was just reading the letter and I thought it was that active construction had to start, not just getting a building permit. Alright,
It would seem to me that you could put conditions on an approval for an extension.
Likely, but I don't know how binding they truly would be. It's not a decision, like posted, recorded decision at the registry.
And then what conditions could you really put on there other than you have to get a building permit?
Right.
You can't change the plan.
But I agree with you. I don't know whether it's you, Tony, that said it or not. It would not be a good idea to have that building remain in its current state for the next 10 years.
No, that was, John was making a comment,
Yeah.
and we didn't want him to do something, demolish half of it or whatever.
Yeah, right, yeah.
right, to say,
Yeah,
okay,
if
we
it stayed in its
started
existing state,
construction.
that's fine, right? But if it started a little bit and then sat for 10 years. But this really doesn't even apply to that, because they can start, you get a building permit, start construction, right? There's nothing compelling them to finish.
Yeah, once they
So,
start, it's
yeah.
valid for its.
Is there a bond on the project?
There's
So are you saying that leans you toward an extension or not?
Yeah,
toward
I just,
construction?
I'm not sure that not approving it sort of gets us anywhere.
If we had the changes to the zoning for the MBTA, does that affect anything?
that zoning will only be for new development if and when approved.
And it's more restrictive than the 40R.
And if we didn't grant an extension and they didn't get a building permit or begin construction, would they have to come back under our current 40R bylaw? Or would they be grandfathered into the previous one?
And there's likely some gray area in terms of their due diligence to seek commencement of construction. If it were to be a new application required, I would think that it falls under the new zoning, new quotes.
Isn't it likely that you require a bond of a demolition? No? I'm getting at, you don't want it in a rubble state.
No, we don't.
And I'm not sure that will serve them either, so. I'm not sure that's really what the issue is.
bonds are typically tied to like public rights and infrastructure uses, not private land.
I'll just say, I could see supporting an extension, I wouldn't want it to end up having, extension upon extension upon extension indefinitely.
I like the fact that they're coming to us now
Yes.
instead of in
Yeah,
February.
that's true.
Yes,
Like
that's
it-
true.
Kind of shows that they're working on it,
Yeah.
but
Does anyone wanna make a motion or?
Oh, sure, I'll move to grant the requested extension for 616 Chute Street, the downtown smart growth plan for 1 year,
That would be from March 16th, 2024 to March 16th, 2025.
yes, to March 16th, 2025.
Second.
Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstaining?
I'm a no
He doesn't
vote.
get to vote.
There's 5.
Oh,
The
Right.
first one's 5-0.
thank you.
Alright.
It's been so long.
I know, right? I'm sorry.
I know my limits.
So, for the next topic, which I imagine we're moving down
Yeah.
the normal
Yeah.
agenda now, yeah. I'm just gonna share the motion on the screen. Someone can, this, if you can see it.
I'll move to enter executive session under purpose 3 to discuss strategy with respect to GC Fodara Contracting Inc. versus Cpdc 459 Main Street litigation because an open meeting would have a detrimental effect on the litigating position of the town as declared by the chair, to invite Andrew McNichol and Ethan.
And Ethan. Ethan can marry
Please
as well.
invite me.
What?
Please invite me too.
Andrew McNichol, Ethan Dively, and Mary Benedetto to attend the executive session and once finished to return to open session to continue on with the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Roll call vote.
Oh,
Oh, roll call vote. All right. Tony,
Yes.
Mark,
Yes.
Heather,
yes.
Hillary,
yes.
John, yes.
Thank you.
So we have the next topic on our agenda. Right, we have a couple of items under planning updates and other topics. I'll leave it up to Mary, you and Andrew on which to tackle first.
Let's start with probably the easiest, which is the SWEC update, which is that there really is kind of none. I guess the update is that they had put out an RFP for proposals. They received one response to that proposal for design considerations of what a build out of the land of Simmons Way might look like. From my understanding, nobody was too enthralled or thrilled with that design or that response to the RFP, and there's been no recommendation to the select board as of yet in terms of that. I do believe SWEC is looking to discuss pickleball and moving that somewhat forward to a recommendation to the select board and town meeting. You might be able to speak better to it.
Well, let me add to that. Right, so my I had to also miss the last meeting. They meet at a time that I cannot attend. It's too early in the evening. But anyhow, so the response to the RFI was for the land that was behind Burbank. So actually no part, because it's a nice rectangle, you can build there. So no part of that response actually entailed the original Simon's Way land, that funny wedge-shaped piece of land. So that's one thing. And then yes, tomorrow night at 6 p.m., the Reading Pickleball Association will be presenting their proposal that I believe they're bringing to town meeting. And the only item on the agenda is to ask for a vote. I don't know that I would say that they are tending toward that, but they are being asked to vote on that.
Thank you for that clarification.
And is there a dog park proposed there?
So the past several meetings, the August meeting focused on getting the RFI out. The past several meetings, the agenda items have been pickleball and dog parks. I believe SWEC is supposed to wind down with recommendations by the end of December. I actually just pulled it up, we did develop kind of evaluation criteria of different proposals or different uses that were providing a wide range of public use, intergenerational use, meets a demonstrated need, and these are in order, and then a tie on the fourth and fifth one of highly ranked per the survey, and maintaining ownership of property. Those two were tied, and then a fifth one where there was tied was minimal taxpayer expense / fiscally responsible. We never really refined those. So I don't know, but I would hope that by the December meeting, we might end up with some recommendations back to the select board. That's kind of where we are.
Thank you. So that was that. Why don't we jump to maybe just meeting minutes and meeting schedule? We can close on MD2 communities.
On the schedule, the only question was just confirming if we wanted to move the meeting time back to 7 p.m. There had been discussion about that at the prior meeting, and I just wanted to double check that that was.
I thought at the prior meeting we said we like 7:30.
I thought we were gonna be.
I thought we weren't gonna really discuss it much until we had the full board.
Yeah.
I'll say that, what?
Yeah, does that work for you?
So the reason why I came up, right, most boards do meet at 7, right? We end up being here really late. And I brought it up because I know in the past that the members of the board, I think we might have even tried it at one point, and people generally had a hard time getting to this meeting at 7. A lot of it had to do with a whole lot of the board worked in downtown Boston and trying to get back just didn't work. I don't know if that's still the makeup of the board and where people work and whether 7 o'clock time works or whether we just want to keep it like it's been for the past 20 years at 7:30 or what. But I just wanted to, I thought putting that on the table just because, right, just why not, right? So
7 o'clock on Mondays works for me. SWEC meets at 6 o'clock. That does not work for me.
And, right, I think what Andrew mentioned, we could do 7 o'clock a couple of times and see whether that's just not gonna work. Or, I mean, as I said, right, we are here often so late. And it would be nice to like not be here at 1 AM
Yeah.
sometimes, so starting a half hour early might be nice.
I have no issues with any time.
I can make 7, I prefer 7:30 though.
Okay.
I have
You wanna
whatever
excuse
you
me?
need.
Get out of
I'm
here.
here.
I just went into a panic thinking we were.
Me
I
too, yeah, I
know.
keep doing
I'm not going home, I'm going to March, and 7:30 was great.
I'm fine.
All right.
Or maybe eating a sandwich here, but
Yeah.
I'm fine.
Well, maybe we try it for like a meeting and
Yeah,
see how
yeah,
it works.
yeah.
And if it's too tough,
Let's make it for the 4:59 meeting.
Let's make it your first January meeting of
Alright.
2024 and
Okay.
see if it
Yeah.
kicks off well, and if it looks
doesn't,
to be a
proceed.
struggle, we will
Yeah.
revert right back. Perfect, thank you guys.
But just a point on staying here late. The later we stay, the more likely it is we actually finish.
Oh.
Because when it's early, people start wanting to comment and
Yeah.
You know, when we added 2, we thought it would shorten your agendas, 2 meetings a month, and it just made 2 long meetings a month.
Yeah.
So sometimes
Yeah.
they build it and they will come, but
Yeah.
worth a shot. Meeting minutes of October 16th, 2023, I think we got some comments from board members already that we've incorporated, so if there's none that we haven't heard to date.
I apologize, I do have one comment
Sure.
for page 7, second paragraph, 5th line from the bottom.
Hold on, I need to open them. Which page?
Page 7, I believe,
Mm-hmm.
or at least the page numbered 7.
Where was the comment?
From the bottom of paragraph 2, or the second paragraph on the page, 5 lines up, starts, Mr. Durezzo said he would be happy.
What's the change?
I'm not happy or.
Would be, well, happy to grant the waiver for 1 loading spot of the 2.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Other than that, an excellent job as usual.
Anything else?
No, oh, sorry, I'm not the only person here.
Motion, anyone? Right? We're all good?
Motion to accept the minutes of 10/16
No, you're at 10:16.
as amended.
Second.
All those in favor?
And I didn't attend, so I won't.
Abstaining,
I'm abstaining
all right,
also.
me too
You had
abstaining,
3, so you're good.
all right.
So technically,
You got
our associate member could vote if he
Yeah, well, I
wanted.
That's
can-
right,
I can
actually,
vote,
you could,
yeah.
yeah.
I can vote.
All right.
and then I-
Technically, I
Alright, we'll
can.
chat. Got it.
I don't want you to be.
And I actually watched probably most of the meetings.
Oh, good.
Alrighty, now to the main entree. So we just wanted to give you guys an update again on our MBTA communities. Our third, fourth.
Before you start, Andrew, can I
Yeah.
say, I watched the, on Zoom, the meeting at the public library, the last one.
Mhm.
Mary, you did excellent. I
She
couldn't
does do an
believe the
excellent
job you did.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was,
I went to the first meeting and that was my feeling too. I was like, wow, this stuff is really complicated. And Mary makes it so easy to understand. And she did a really good job on
We're
that.
happy to hear that. Thank you. She worked extremely hard and she is very,
And
very
even,
good at it.
looking at the slides for the next meeting, very understandable. Good recaps on things.
Mhm. Yeah, we've just tried to break it down. Doing a good job.
Yeah,
So-
it's the law, I mean, it's a bummer that the law is so technical, right? Like there's no possible way to discuss any aspect of the law without having to dig like deep into the technicalities of zoning. Which is why it was like the whole first part of the process is like, well, we have to educate people about why we're gonna talk about these things. Cause if you start from the point of like, we're gonna change the minimum lot size without explaining why you have to change the minimum lot size,
Right.
it's a whole different
And
discussion.
most people don't understand zoning at
Zoning
all.
from the,
Right.
from the
So they're
get-go,
sitting
yeah.
there going, now, how would this affect my house?
Mhm. Right.
And they just can't picture, setbacks and
Mhm.
things like that, so.
Yeah, all of the forums to date, I feel have gone extremely well and been positively received. So all in all, it's leading up to what is becoming our final proposals, and that's really what we wanted to start digesting with you guys tonight of kind of two certain elements to them. There's more to it, but there's two specific questions, both for you guys and potentially the public at large, that we try to decide upon.
Before we
Yep.
dive into it, do you, just curious, right? Because I know a lot of towns, I'm gonna say, let's keep it in the general area, right? There's a lot of towns that have already gone through the process and have approved. Have you, right, Arlington approved,
Yeah.
Lexington,
Like
you know?
three.
There's like
What-
a small
It's like not very
handful,
many.
yeah.
Yeah, so I guess that's that's my question was, I've heard of a couple, and where do we stand in that group, right? I know you talk with other planners around, so how do we stand? I'm not asking about what our plan looks like compared to them, because they're all different, but like in terms of process and that, how are we stacking up?
Where we stand is actually pretty far, not far ahead, but ahead of where some other commuter rail communities on a similar deadline of us are. Some are kicking off their engagement now, some still working towards some of that if they live in cities that have a different style of government.
Yeah, there's a big
so-
difference between people who have town meeting and not,
Mhm.
because they're running completely different types of processes if you have a city council. There's a lot less engagement needed when you
Oh,
only have
yeah,
10 people.
Right, that's, yeah.
Right, it's, yeah,
Yeah.
different set of people to educate.
Yep, so those types of communities and planners are running totally different
Yeah.
processes than we are.
Yep.
There's only 12 communities that have to do it by the end of this year,
Mhm.
and then next year there's like 100 or
70
something.
to 100,
70
yeah,
to
something
100?
like that.
And several of the ones that have passed it this year are not the ones, they're actually not the ones that have a deadline this
But
year.
like Arlington did not
Arlington's
have their
deadline is not
deadline.
till like 2025.
I
Oh,
think
really?
it,
Yeah,
so.
the same as
But they were incentivized because they wanted to be allowed to,
like
There
grant
was
funding or
something-
zero, I
something.
think, yeah, there was another.
Yeah, and
they
they're
were-
trying
Yeah.
to.
They were motivated by opting into a climate oriented.
Yeah, so they're really pushing ahead for the enhanced stretch code and also are one of the 10 communities trying to do like this full electrification
That's
only
what it is, it's the
process. And I
electrification.
think there was some sort of funding or process that they needed this to get into that. So they moved right ahead along and did a good job with that. But all in all, we are pretty good, and from what I've heard, Reading does continue to be some sort of model or example for many others who are kind of following with us and following footsteps of other communities that a lot of our tools and resources have been pulled and used. And same for towns like Newton, who's doing a fantastic job, and Wakefield and others too. But it's good that Reading is out there.
Right.
So, all in all, we're still, I guess, to the point of like whether it aligns with their proposals or what they're thinking for zoning. We're still a small handful pursuing more of this moderate density, but we know that our direct neighbor in Wakefield is actually pursuing a substantially similar concept to support their downtown with moderate, medium, gentle density units. So that was good to hear from them. And same with Andover and a small handful of others too. So it's going good.
Right, I didn't mean to
No.
derail you, I just
Nope.
wanted to sort
No,
of.
it's one of the,
question.
honestly, it's
Yeah.
one of the biggest questions we're getting asked
Yeah.
now, is what other people are doing. Yeah, there's like a handful that are doing similar things to us. There's a number that are pursuing 40R districts
Mhm.
for their, like a new 40R district for their compliance, or are working on something that is
Substantially
40R-esque.
similar, yeah.
Yeah. Those are really the two routes.
So I'm gonna kind of jump ahead into
I'll also, it, when any of this comes up, whether it's in Reading or something else, and, right, I do think that it's important for people to understand, right, like, how many towns need to do this, in cities and towns, right, and so there's gonna be this environment where, unlike when we did 40R, right, where we stuck out because we did take this action that said, you know, please, you know, take a look at us, we just changed our zoning, right, we're just gonna be one of hundreds of other towns that just changed their zoning, and so, although there's an opportunity for increased housing, it's not the same. I don't think it's the same spur specifically in Reading as our last big zoning change, right, for the 40R overlay spurred in terms of demand.
I don't think it's the same spur, but it will, as we get ready for town meeting, something to be aware of. And we saw this at the last town meeting, is with so many towns doing it at the same time. There are some members of town meeting who dig in and say, well, this town's doing it this way, why aren't we doing it that way? So we should be prepared to be defining why we are doing it this way and really knowledgeable about what other towns are doing, because there are some members that will ask about that.
Yeah, I got sent like the Arlington article like 4 or 5 times. And I was like, yep, that is something that someone else could do. Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
like up to 6 stories. Or
Yeah, it was
let
like,
you
they were
in
like, we should do that, and I was
that's
like, it's 6 stories.
Yeah,
That's what we want.
and actually having that comparison is
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
for the argument in the
Yeah.
town meeting, I think, yeah.
So I'm probably gonna jump right into what is the middle of our presentation, because I won't
Yeah.
catch you all up on what you already know. But starting here, just to kind of remind in a visual-esque sense of what we're trying to accomplish with zoning here is in between your detached single-family dwelling and in between your downtown mid-rise development, there's a slew of housing options that are available to the development and residential world. And that's what we're looking to promote in our zoning through both the dimensional controls and the maximum allowances is what we're looking at, and then subsequently where those are allowed. And that's predominantly a lot of what we've been focusing on. So our 2 workshops, we held some workshopping on the dimensional controls of zoning and how that relates to from larger lots all the way down to smaller lots, because we know that our minimum lot sizes need to drop to about 5,000 square feet. So we wanted to have a workshop that showed that a number of our existing setbacks and parking requirements still really naturally phase smaller lots out from being overbuilt with more units in them. And you can see here from a 12,000 to 8,000 to 5,000 square foot lot, things just naturally get tighter and tighter and tighter.
This looks like it was a really good exercise, by
It was
the
a lot
way.
of fun.
It was lots,
yeah.
yeah. At first everyone was like, why are you making me play with paper? And I was like, follow me on this journey and you will learn why we're playing with paper.
And it really worked. I think people
did,
really
actually. It was
got
very
to see
effective.
how these lots, like, and we'll get to our concept in a minute, that some of these lots can't fit what is that unit capacity term that we keep saying, that unit capacity works upwards and downwards. Zoning might allow up to 6, 8, 10 units, but a lot can't fit that based on what the zoning controls and how it controls it. So it was really well worth it, and the mapping was too, which we'll get to. But as I had just mentioned, the challenge of our districts is achieving the 15 unit density acre requirement with the type of development we're looking to promote and use here, which is the smaller medium infill housing. So we know that minimum lot sizes have to come down because we're trying to bring what is currently 90+% of lots being non-conforming in this area and flip that to be a 90% conforming status so that they're accounted for in the compliance model and that we can use them in this zoning as well for any type of fill of housing, mix of housing. So lot sizes are going to be proposed at a 5,000 square foot minimum lot and a 60-foot minimum frontage. So current standards are 15,000 and 100 feet, but we've looked at the data and we've gone back to work backwards to get to a 90% compliance rate with our lots in and around that half-mile area. So that's kind of the major component of getting these lots into compliance. And then the next step is what are the other controls around them to ensure that these smaller lots that typically haven't been built by right aren't being overbuilt. So what we're looking to propose here is a 1.25 parking requirement where it's currently 1.5 for multifamily. We're likely to propose that across the board for multifamily in section 9. Again, we'll get to how our concept works in a second, but 1.25 is the proposal, and when you look at some of the units we're projecting on some of the lots, the parking spaces aren't substantially different than the existing requirements, but it helps us achieve one, compliance, getting these lots to be accounted for in the compliance model because they're not X'd out for being overregulated and overbuilt, and two, we feel it's a right size parking because unlike where downtown was, I guess, increased from 1.25 to 1.5 and other, because those spaces felt there was a demand for employees, customers, residents, guests, commuters alike, this area is not subject to all of those demands and competing users. So we feel that 1.25 is a viable ratio for our proposed developments. When we go back and we look at some of the lot sizes and again relate them back to the uses that we're looking to allow for in this zoning, we've compared single family, two family, and multifamily units. And we broke it down further to say multifamily 3 to 4 units, multifamily 5 to 12 units to get a median lot size. And you can see that median lot size for multifamily of 3 to 4 units is even less than median of single families. There's a lot more single families in there, right? But all in all, they are remaining fairly consistent in lot sizes from 1, 2, 3 to 4. The 5 to 12, we only have 2 projects in the whole half mile that we were looking at in the specified geography that were between 5 and 12 units. The rest were 12, 13 plus and really dramatically increased lot sizes because they're like 25, 40 units, and so it's hard to account for those in comparison. But looking at it again, in the built world, 3 to 4 units can substantially work with single family requirements, and so that's where we're going to be focusing on.
Andrew, I've got a question.
Yeah.
When you say 3 to 4 units can work with single family requirements, what do you mean dimensional requirements?
Dimensional requirements.
I love that graphic right up there. Cause to me, I was like stared at it for a while. I'm like, really? Oh, that fits. Can you list how many, right? Because you just said, and I was thinking about this while I was looking at it, right? The 5 to 12, like you just mentioned, it's 2. How many are there 3 to 4? Or how many 2 family?
Yeah.
Right? Because the number, the average, right, or the median, right, sort of like
Yeah,
the number.
we can change this from a percent. We had talked about
Yeah.
that too. Of do we show the counts or a percentage? So where you see it's just 3% of the units that we looked at, or structures that we looked at is 3 to 4. It is a lot less than the 75% single family lots that we looked at in the area. So yeah, that median,
And while I interrupted you, I'm gonna interrupt one
Yeah,
other thing.
go
On the other one, the parking spaces.
Yep.
So this is just, and help me wrap my head around this, right? This would be for changing the base zoning. So, I guess what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, why do we care about 1 or 2 unit? Why do you have 1 or 2 units in there? Because those,
it's a good point. They're subject to different parking requirements.
I mean, it's good to show as an
Yeah.
example, but right, for this change, right, we're really just talking about the 3, 4, 5, and 6.
That's a great
Right.
note. Yeah.
Because when I look at this, I do, thinking about one parking spaces or two spaces for a single unit, to me,
People will
That's-
get chipped up on that.
that's a big change,
Yeah.
right? But 5 to 4 or 6 to 5, like that's not as big of a change because it's more flexibility. So
That's a great.
that's where I got hung up on that too.
Yeah,
And then realized, wait, that's not even
Not even applying. Now you're totally right. We can nix that.
and I know you're trying to get through this, and I know John loved this slide. I find the one that has
Yeah.
the bar graph.
You didn't.
Well, no,
It's okay.
I love it too, but the more I think, it's one of the more I look at, when I listen to you and I look at it, then I get a little bit confused. So there are 3 different charts on here. Did I hear you say that the 5 to 12 unit properties, we only actually have a couple of those properties, right?
Right.
And so the chart on the upper right is showing the number of units. We have 107 units spread
No.
across 2.
Lots.
This is
So what is
lots
that?
by, so this is 107 lots between 12,000 and 15,000 square feet. So we were trying to show how we got to that backwards work to that 90% compliance, which is that everything 5,000 and up should comply, and to get to there, right,
Okay.
this ends up being our floor. Any lower, really, it doesn't matter or isn't viable.
It might confuse people if you go through it too quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and the graph to the left, lower left, that's intended to show, let's just stay with 5 to 12 units, that the average lot size is 11,233. Is that what that's intended to show?
Median lot size is
Median,
11,000.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, gotcha.
So here's the, and maybe you're going here, but the thing that I was like, okay, when I looked through this in advance, I was like, oh, this is all great, it's pretty and everything. So to say that the new minimum lot size for the new district will be 5,000 square feet, when everything on the bar graph is showing that our median is above 5,000 square feet, are we going to the place of explaining how that then fits on 5,000 square feet? Because this is, anyhow, it's smaller than everything we have, or at least the median of everything we have,
Yeah,
right?
so,
Yeah.
and I can explain this better on Wednesday. The 5,000 is in essence for this, to get the most number of lots in zoning compliance as possible. And that shows through here that to get to 90%, 5,000 ends up being the minimum that we need. So 5,000 achieving 3+ units on it is up to development or proposal to vet that out and make sure that the parking can fit on site and that setbacks can be met and lot coverage can be met and all of these other controls are met. So we saw in our workshop that it's pretty tight to get 3 units on there, let alone 6. So 5,000 and that 5 to 8,000 foot range, you're likely looking at smaller single family units, 2-family units potentially. Max maybe a 3-unit structure on a lot that size is our expectation.
So just because it's 5,000, right, we're changing the minimum lot size to 5,000, it all depends on the setbacks and all the other
Right.
things on whether you could actually fit a 3-unit development on that 5,000.
Right.
Yeah.
But you're bringing that 5,000 lot into conformance
Performance, right?
instead of it being a non-conforming lot,
Right.
which is, right, most of Reading,
Which is
right?
most of
Probably everyone here lives on it.
And so that's again, and then we can kind of
Just
move on,
guessing.
it's just kind of to me, it's kind of a flag that, if we're talking about MBTA communities, is, getting us to the place where we're allowing 3 units on a property by right. It just gets a little confusing to then mix in the single family, we'll end up single family, double family, I think we should just spend some time sorting out how that becomes very clear without
Yeah, we
getting
can-
people confused.
to break some of this up a little bit and
Yeah.
Just gonna
maybe.
delete it off the slide.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like it's like part of this whole process is like keeping people focused, right? And being like, there's actually only a few things in here that people can offer their input on. This is not one of them, right? The 5,000 is a fixed number. We can't debate that. We can debate how we present it.
and I'm saying
Oh,
debate,
yes.
I'm saying
Yeah.
think about how we present it so that it's moving us toward
Yep.
the
Where
actual
we're-
goal of complying with MBTA
Mhm.
communities.
Mhm.
I mean, it has the ancillary benefit
Yeah,
of
we
bringing
had
properties into compliance.
We had a number of questions about
Conformance.
the like data over the course of the workshop and the prior event, which is why we added a bunch more. But if it raises more questions than it answers,
Yeah, we can invent that out some and think about that a bit more.
I'm gonna give you my math.
Mm-hmm.
If I add up everything but the 49, which is below 5,000, that's 800. Since if every one of those lots had a 3-unit building or 2 more units, that would be 1,600, which would meet the 1,500 requirement, where my math has nothing to do with, I just reached those numbers because that's the way
Your
it's
math,
nothing to do with math.
while very high level and looks correct, is not entirely correct because once the lot starts factoring in the parking and the setbacks, can't achieve the 3 units, and so not all of those lots are actually viable.
So it's math without purpose, because I think I get into your next graph, and I think that's where I began to have a little bit more trouble. But I understand where you're coming from. In other words, forget the math. It's got
Yes,
nothing
pretty
to
much
do-
we
it's got nothing
encourage
to do
people
with
not
getting
to
the
try to
15.
solve it themselves in their head because the numbers don't actually work out that way. So this graph was in essence again relating back to why we're proposing the minimum of 60 feet of frontage, which frontage is your lot line that's abutting a right of way, typically your front lot line. On a corner lot it can sometimes be 2, but a vast majority of our lots are under 100 feet in frontage currently, so to bring us into compliance and get them to comply, we have to lower our standard again. We again kind of broke that down into the units and structures, and we can debate the merit of this, but again, frontage for multifamily 3 to 4 units is substantially similar or in close relation to single and 2 family units. 5 to 12 we see a jump, but again I would note those are 2 separate lots only, and one happens to be very, very, very long. It's on Haven Street and it's a 6-unit townhome that's like 250 feet long or something like that. So not exactly enough data to fully support that 5 to 12 number there, but we wanted to include it still, and again if it raises more questions we can try to debate if it should be included or not.
Now, the same answer you're gonna give me when I do the math here. If I take out the 115 and add up the rest, I come out to maybe 600 lots or so. But forget the math. The math should not be applied to this figure to achieve the 1,500.
Correct. This is strictly by frontage. There's no other control here that seeks compliance or not.
And we have to hit what percentage, or because it's 13% is
We're seeking as close to 90 as we can
And this is just all about bringing the lots into
into zoning
compliance.
the
conformance.
frontage has a little less weight, if you will, in the
Mhm.
compliance model than the lot size. The lot size is arguably actually the most important factor.
okay. Yeah.
So this all comes back to conforming lots means by right development. And whether that's single, 2, or 3 plus, it's by right because the lots are by right. So
But I would think most of the 5,000 square foot lots have a 50-foot frontage, as opposed to 60.
it's close. It's close. So we just thought that 60 was a floor that seemed viable and agreeable. We thought any lower was getting into
I mean, yeah,
choppy waters.
50-foot frontage is tiny, like
Yeah.
you'd have struggle to get a drive
Mhm.
and anything.
Yeah, so we want compliance, but we also want to, 1, have the desirable type of builds that Reading sees as appropriate, and 2, ensure that we are meeting what we hear from the public as well. So when we keep moving towards other dimensional controls, that comes back towards setbacks, and so existing S15 setbacks are a bit too restrictive for some of these small lots that we've been seeing. And again, to look to promote the type of development we would like to see happen, we're proposing lowering the minimum setbacks, particularly on the sides because of how many narrow lots we have across our town and most certainly near and around the downtown. A lot of existing homes do tend to be a bit closer to the street, so we've reduced the front yard setback to look to match those, while also looking to keep the rear yard setback as much as we can to promote private green space or yard space or amenity space that someone might more desire in their yard. So right now required front yard setbacks are 20 feet, we're proposing 10. Required side yards are 15 feet, we are again proposing 10 for side yard setbacks. And we're proposing to reduce rear yard setbacks from 20 feet to 15 feet. And that's again to really look that some of these smaller lots could see built on them and not be overly restrictive.
Two things, when I looked at this slide, two things I jumped to. One is, you have this graphic of the, right, of the houses, and maybe I might be one to understand what I'm looking at more than others. But, right, I immediately went to, oh gee, I wonder what that range, right, we have a neighborhood here, right, presumably it's somewhere in Reading, that's somewhere in this district. What's the current range that I'm looking at here in terms of front, side, and maybe not rear, but what I went to was front and side setbacks in this image that we're looking at,
Gotcha.
which I presume is sort of representative of a lot of the corridor. Maybe that's one thing that I thought of when I saw this slide. The other thing, which I know a lot of people, and maybe you would hit on it in this slide, the bottom left hand, right, that there's a big difference, and you can see it actually in this graphic right here, right? There's a big difference between a front setback from the road and the front setback. And I think that that's something, right, people that are not zoning or even
Right.
property sort of specific, right, they might go out and be like, well, my house is,
Right, you
you
can't
know,
do that,
you
right.
can't do that,
Right.
right?
Like measure to the sidewalk and
Yeah,
say,
say,
yes,
yes,
yes.
because it's
Yes.
almost exclusively different.
yes.
And
Right, I think, didn't you have in the revisions, isn't there something with respect to front setbacks with the neighboring lots?
So there's an odd footnote in the dimensional
Yeah.
control table that pretty much makes our front setback irrelevant. It's a bit oddly worded, and that's across all zones. And
Yeah.
so
It basically allows you to have the same front back as your two neighbors on your left and the right.
yeah,
So you don't have to put your house 20 feet back if they're both 5.
right,
But if they're 20 feet back, it can't be 10.
Correct.
right.
The-
That's an odd one.
The only, on the side, if you look on your little, your example,
Mm-hmm.
with a 10-foot side yard, you're not getting a driveway in there. That's
Right, you
pretty-
would probably put, like, that's
It's tight, I
provided
can
you're
guarantee it.
building, that's provided you're building to all your setbacks, like, if you aren't building all the way across, you can fit that driveway in there, right? The building doesn't have to go to a
Right, it is
setback.
the important point that these are minimum standards, somebody could certainly exceed
Cause the next
them.
one talks about the lot coverage,
Mm-hmm.
but I just because I've been encountering it a lot in my work, there are some towns that have like, you can only go 32 feet in one, and then you have to step it back 2 feet or just,
What do you mean?
so like on the side setback, you can build to the side setback, but only for 32 feet, then you have to step it back 2 feet.
Oh, like lengthwise, 32.
There's like,
yeah, yeah.
or in the front, you can build it to the 20 feet, but if you have a garage, it has to be 25 feet at the garage. So that you have like a variation,
Yeah.
you know, a push-pull, so you're not building completely to all your setbacks.
I know that these are minimums, and one way I toyed with how can you do it, you could say that your 2 side yards can't be less than 5, but no more than a total of
Oh,
20,
right, like a percentage,
Right.
yeah.
something like that.
There are
There's so many ways.
creative way, you can do it based on frontage length, and I've seen that for front setbacks, like your front setback can be 10% of whatever your frontage is or more, and so there's all sorts of crazy, we've tried to keep it simple, to
Yeah.
best understand and not get too into the weeds. One thing we have thought about, and maybe you can let me know if it's too crazy, is like scaling it, where maybe like some of these smaller lots can have lesser setbacks, but larger lots would have higher setbacks to kind of keep promoting the space. But we see and prefer a holistic district where like everything applies.
It makes it so much
overall.
easier
Yeah,
to regulate it.
right. So
I will tell you, I'd prefer like a 5-foot setback
you would?
on the front, and then you could actually even put that 5 feet on the back, giving more people room in the rear yard. Because really, what's a 10-foot front yard buy you?
Right.
Nothing.
So yeah, so
Annoying landscaping.
I mean
I actually really differ from that, and I'm thinking about the fact, it's like, you know, you do have sidewalks, you do have walkways, and a little courtyard, I think, is better for the street. For people walking on the
Right,
street.
but the sidewalk doesn't mean that, like, the setback doesn't always, like, your property line might be at the sidewalk.
Right.
It might be at the street, it might be, like, it depends.
It varies.
Yeah.
I do not think that right or wrong, right? That going in and saying we have a 20 foot front yard setback and we're gonna do it down to 5. And that 5, right, doesn't need to be green. It doesn't, I think that's, I don't, I'm not so sure.
I agree with that sentiment.
Town meeting would change that.
I just,
There would be
Yeah, there was a lot of
backlash.
comment about wanting green space in the front
Yeah.
in our
Yes.
workshop, which is why we did reduce it lower. We also felt that if we kept it low, though, it might incentivize people to put parking in the rear, which would be desirable,
Yeah.
versus putting parking in the
in the
front.
front, yeah.
Well, and as long as we don't allow on-street parking during the winter time, houses will still need to be built with like a long driveway or parking in the back.
Yeah. Yeah, and so on that footnote 1, it basically says any front setback can be 10 feet. It's not even just the averages, except for a multifamily dwelling. And so we're in our zone, at least for this zone specifically, we're saying, why does that requirement need to be there? Like, why? A single family can have a 10-foot front setback, even though it says 20. Why can't a multifamily also 3-unit achieves the same? What's probably not listed on this slide, and maybe it's listed ahead, and I'm jumping ahead, but we are also keeping height at 35 feet, which is the same as single family.
And the FAR is
Yeah, that is
Yeah.
important.
FAR is
next.
FAR, we aren't
Next,
delving
you're
into
not doing
FAR because our existing dimensional controls do not capture FAR. So we're looking at it from the
That's a
lot
floor
coverage.
area ratio.
Floor area ratio, which is from your net floor area typically,
Gross.
gross, gross,
That's to
and
the outside of your walls.
yeah, to the outside of your walls in the full measurement compared to your lot size. So we've seen what typically works for these styles is anywhere from 0.5 to 0.8, but we haven't gone down there because we don't have it in our table, so we don't feel the need to propose it here. We think that lot coverage, which currently exists at 25% for single family, from what we've heard from the workshops, that 30% seems to be a viable and amenable increase without over developing a lot. So you can see here, and this is an online tool that Mary had reached out.
Let me explain it. We're gonna replace them. Let's
Yeah,
keep going.
I agree. It's
Let's keep going.
so 30% feels viable, so that's what we're gonna propose. In a
Now that percentage is structures.
structure
Not
only,
driveways.
yes, not driveways.
Decks, is that,
Decks is typically, unless covered, it's not lot coverage. Permeable pavers are not lot coverage, so it's structure only, principal or accessory, so a shed or garage would count towards lot coverage. And a pool, yes. it
No, we
depends.
remove
structure.
sport items from lot
Rules.
coverage.
What?
We remove sport items from lot coverage.
Yeah, but not a pool.
Not
A pool is considered structure.
I believe you're correct.
Makes
on
no
that,
sense to me.
so it makes no sense, yeah. Welcome to zoning. So.
Now we can start talking pervious and impervious.
Yeah. So here just again was a summary of our proposal from the current standards of S15 for single family and what we're looking to accomplish with the new zoning that would allow 1+ units and including multifamily. So the first big question that we're posing to either you or the community is, from our research and from our compliance testing of what we found, that we would like to consider a way to put maximum limits on units on a lot so that there isn't the fear that they're overbuilt or overdense. And the 2 floors that we found is either a 6 unit per lot maximum, and that would apply to all lots. Six units can be allowed. Or what we prefer and would like to see is the 22 units per acre maximum on a lot. And we prefer that alternative because, one, it gives you flexibility as it scales with lot sizes. A 5,000 square foot lot is looking at 2.5, call it 3 units when you round up maximum, and up to a 20,000 square foot lot, which could be looking at 8 units or so. And that gives us flexibility in not just the types of housing, but the style of housing that we could look to promote as well. We're cognizant of 6 units lots per maximum, that like someone on a small lot could try to squeeze in 6 1-bedrooms and try to make everything work in a studio fashion and be this wonky build that really isn't desirable. So we thought that the units per acre maximum is more appropriate, but we're also cognizant on that end that there are some larger lots in the area. There's not a lot, but there are lots that scale up to an acre. There are lots that scale up to slightly over an acre as well. So when you look at, that's 22 units potentially on a lot. But when we look at those and what we can try to do for that development style is use our, this is just a draft, please bear with us, but use our design guidelines and regulations or zoning that we'll be looking to do to promote what's, again, keeping the form to these smaller builds, courtyard builds. Maybe if you think of St. Agnes, the 40B on Woburn Street, it's 20 units, but it's not overly arching on the neighborhood. It fits pretty well in, it's just a long structure, and it came out really great. So we feel that while the unit counts as they scale up could be potentially scary to people, that as we work to get our forms narrowed down and how we would like to see those larger lots developed and regulated, that we can kind of mitigate those concerns to the utmost degree. So I guess my question for you is if you have thoughts on one versus the other, or if you would like us to propose what we feel is best and not, because it's going to be hard to reach a consensus from anyone. So
When you say acre, that's a buildable acre, so you deduct from that any wetlands or on that lot. In other words, I've got a lot, it's 1,500 feet, that's about what, a third of an acre-ish, yeah, about a third of an acre, so I'd be entitled to a third of 22 units.
Yep.
But is it a buildable space? In other words, let's say I only have buildable 10 out of my 15 acres.
So that's a naturally constraining factor. We do have upland requirements for developments, and you just couldn't build in it if it was wet. You couldn't build in the wet portions. So while like if you had, call it 42,000
I'm not
square
complaining
feet.
with that. I think I'm siding more with you now on the 22.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just saying
Yeah.
whether the word buildable.
So it comes down to like, if you had an acre-sized lot and half of it was wet in the rear and half was buildable, you might be allowed 22 units in, say, the density requirement, but is it feasible in 30% lot coverage of that upland requirement and the other dimensional controls? So,
I don't think there are any wetlands in our zone.
there are none, yeah, so.
So that would be an important point to make.
Yeah.
Also, when you're saying you round up, like we could add a footnote that you aren't allowed to round up, you have to only at the number or below like you see that sometimes.
Yeah, the way we were gonna propose it if it moved forward was 0.5 and above would round up because 5,000 at 22 units per acre is 2.5, and we do kind of need that to try to achieve 3. So 0.5 would round up, and above would round up, anything lower would round down.
So did you say we do or don't in the area have 1 acre lots?
We do. There's a handful.
Right now,
My
right now.
My reaction to your question is if the overall goal of the law, which I kind of agree with, is to build housing within a certain distance of the commuter rail service, is that if we have lots that can handle more units, let's go with the units per acre.
Yeah.
And I also agree with addressing kind of the compatibility
Mhm.
with the surrounding residential area through design requirements. I do, design guidelines can end up being squishy, but if
Mhm.
we can tend more toward the requirements and something in the, that would be, I think, helpful.
Yeah. So this is an aside note that I was saving for after, but it kind of ties in. So we got a grant award that we had submitted and received 95,000, and we're looking to contract with RKG, GIS and development firm, and Innis Design. And a big portion of our scope is to do a design and pattern book that would supplement this new zoning district. So that we can look at these different and varying lot sizes and develop either 1, 2, or a small handful of design concepts that we feel is appropriate for that scale of lot and how that works in with the neighborhood. So that's to come. Right now it's outside the scope of our zoning bylaw and it's kind of on the aside. We can talk about like if that's merited into working into the zoning bylaw and being real stringent zoning requirements, or if that ends up being its own separate regulation and type of book, but we are working on that, so I just want everybody to know that because it is an important factor, and we hope that Innis can help us find some examples and some forms that work well. So
Here's another question. If we go to 22 units per acre, aren't we dealing in our circle with a lot of acres? Isn't that gonna produce the potential of being substantially over the 1,500?
We're gonna get there.
we are getting
That's
so.
coming up as a point.
So the other thing we can consider, I guess, in terms of like, to answer part of your question, is like a maximum lot size, right, of like 1 acre or something like that. That way we're not or a max frontage that we're considering. That way we're not seeing the conjoining of 2, 3, 4 large lots into one conglomerate massive structure, which again isn't really going to be possible again based on our 30% lot coverage and other controls. But when you start, we don't want to see like an over structure, a huge structure, I guess. Not that it's wrong, but we're trying to limit, I guess, what could be overly developed.
In other words, one of the things you're thinking of is to limit the eligibility in this area to over 5,000, but 1 acre and less. So that anything above that would have to come to CPDC.
We could consider that. We haven't really proposed that yet, but if it is something that people would feel more comfortable with and fear of overdevelopment, I would think like an acre is a decent floor to set.
But I guess if someone is able to put a couple of parcels together to create a 2-acre parcel, which I would find astounding, looking at the map, like go for it.
theoretical.
Yeah, go for it.
Right.
And do some
Right.
townhomes.
Yeah, like sure, that would be a big development, but it would still be it would still,
The form would still.
the form would still fit
Right.
with the existing neighborhood, so.
Yeah, the max lot coverage remains 35% even if you assemble 4 lots.
Right. So to me, it's like, yeah, go for it. You're not, you're not doing yourself any favor from just by building individual, maybe a little
Exactly,
bit,
that's the thing.
maybe a little bit,
Right.
but it's not like you're, a developer would have a windfall by doing that, right?
Exactly, so that's why we've steered away from it, but
I guess my thought is that we see and we, struggle so often on this board with like, just because you're allowed to do something, right, doesn't mean that you should, right? And this is going to the, somewhat your comment about someone trying to fit 6 units on, a 5,000 square foot, like, no, like that's, to me.
That's not what we meant.
That's not, right, that's not appropriate, probably, right? I like the scaling because I think you're more likely to get things that match the lot size and the neighborhood.
it just gives us flexibility to try to see more varying styles of this
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
With-
your typical.
With the scaling, can you remind me, and I'm asking because I honestly cannot remember, and I think it might be asked, where did we land on the units per acre in the 40R district?
50 is the max.
50, okay, that's just good for people to know, we're still talking about half the density of what's allowed in 40R.
In response to your question, Tom, too, about the unit count being very high, the 22 units per acre is the lowest we can go while still achieving the required density. So like within our
Because
plan,
of other reasons.
yeah, the biggest challenge for us is the 15 units per acre density. We're gonna be well over everything else. Nothing else is a challenge for us. It's trying to do the lower density.
Well, the only reason I mentioned setting that range between 5,000 square feet and an acre, having anything above that come back, is to say, we're not saying you can't do it, it just has to come back here. But my reason for doing that is, and again, subject comments from the general public, I saw one diagram in here that had the historic district included in it, and I might be tempted to exclude the historic district
We're
from
with
the
ya.
area,
Don't worry, we
with
get
the
you.
exception that somebody could still apply for it, but it'd have to go through CPDC.
Yeah, so all of this is still subject to CPDC review, and again, we can maybe get there when we talk bylaw language if you really want to see 3 or 4 unit structures at the beginning, or if they end up exempt and everything above is site plan review, but in the meantime, we're operating, I guess, under a slight assumption that all of this multifamily triggers site plan review under the current bylaws, so.
Even the 3 units? So, okay.
Until
Well,
we
it's site
change it,
plan
if we
review,
change
but
it.
you can't, it has to be, it can't be discretionary.
Right,
Right, so I guess all in all, we're feeling more confident in the density dimensional control. It's what we prefer. It sounds like it gives a lot of variety here and some confidence as well, so.
Can I just say my takeaway then? So my takeaway from what you all have said is you feel good, and that with that in mind, I would prefer not to present the 6 unit, not to put an option to the public on Wednesday.
I
Just
agree.
say this is our preferred option, and instead spend more time making the pitch for why that's the better fit.
But I think you need another slide to say, here's what 22 units means, if you've got a
Right,
5,000
yeah,
square
we
foot,
do
it means
that.
that.
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
That's like
absolutely,
some point
and
I
again,
just
I will underscore, there was the reason I gave, and the other reason is that if we say you can do 6 units per lot on a 5,000 square lot, people will try to do
They're
that.
gonna try,
And if we
yeah.
said you can do that, we have no standing to really say they
Yeah.
can't.
Right. Yeah, and I guess just for y'all awareness too, we did look at 4 unit lots for a maximum and I think 20 units per acre, and they just didn't work out for the density, so. So the next element of this that we've been working towards is the mapping and where this zone is to be located, and we've done a lot of back and forth in terms of like, okay, there's 2 things. There's one, compliance, which we're well above hopefully with whatever map we end up proposing, because we're above 43 acres. We're kind of well above that, so we aren't really too concerned with achieving compliance of the minimum standards in the zone and law requirements. The second is what's more of an appropriate scale that starts to reflect the change that we desire in housing market and affordability and units and variety. So when we started looking at it, and I'm just going to jump right to the maps, I had started to draw out kind of what feels like a fully connected, holistic, encircling zone to our downtown. This is the half mile here, and we had a few shape files that we had started with, and I kind of looked to expand it based on our workshopping that we did with the community, where it sounded like a few people or a handful of people or a good amount of people were comfortable with going larger than smaller in the zone, while understanding there's still a good portion who would like to see smaller rather than larger. So we're trying to work somewhere in the middle of that, and that's what we're trying to strike right now. So this first map, I fully understand, at around 500 acres is a substantial change and quite the sales job to look to promote this one. You're starting from down at in between Business A and the Pinevale area, up and around Summer Ave, into going north towards the Laurel Hill Cemetery, and wrapping back down, wrapping around Walker's Brook, and looking to fully support our downtown fully connected zone. That way it's not broken apart or piecemealed. I do know that there's concerns of the historic district, and most certainly I would be willing to either draw around that district at its lines or through other natural boundaries, or alternatively, if there was some comfort in looking at it, that we do some sort of sub-districting or stronger design requirements in our pattern book for that area. It's a conversation, admittedly, that we're trying to avoid, so it's likely easiest to just like avoid the historic districts. But when I looked at the geography, it just made sense to go up Summer to Mineral and try to connect to this area. You capture Tannerville and other A40s, you keep your open space in there and looking to promote around it, and it's all still a short walk to the downtown. So I know that this is a large map, so we worked to develop a smaller map that, one, left out the historic district area, two, did not look to capture behind Business A here down on the southwest side, and three, kind of shorten the connection between these two districts here so that they could remain connected and whole, so that we can get it to comply with the model. So we know that both could be subject to coming down, and we can still try to reach compliance, but we're struggling with what's appropriate for like the scale and
We very much
usefulness.
disagree.
Yeah.
So I'm not gonna answer your question about the scale just yet, but I have a question that may be a little controversial.
Mm-hmm.
I am not fully understanding why homes in a historic district couldn't be converted to multifamily and still carry the same historic qualities.
I believe that they could, and that was part of
Yeah.
the reasoning to try to look at it further that I wanted to do. I think that they could. We are not removing any historical jurisdictions or powers or elements. I think that there's a lot to be said that a new development would, no matter how many interior units, could still capture the feel and vibe of a historic home, and we could look to promote that. Again, either in the zoning of a sub-district or in the design and pattern book, or both. So
Yeah, I guess I'll just suggest, and this is again, I may get all kinds of calls tomorrow, I don't know. But I wouldn't just automatically remove the historic district. Sometimes that's actually kind of a nice solution for big homes that people can't otherwise maintain.
Right, isn't Woburn Street, a lot of those already multifamily?
And
Anyway.
Woburn Street, to me, primarily is the reason I looked at that area. Woburn Street is such a major corridor that we want to look to promote in this zone, and for pedestrian improvements and connections, and really kind of using that as a main connection along with Prescott from that southern side to get to downtown. So Woburn Street to me is just an important corridor to look at in general.
Yeah, and the lots are so big on Summer and Burn.
Yeah.
I think there was concern from the historical district commission and historic commission that if you zone over it, they would feel like you were incentivizing development to tear them down or do other things with it. Maybe they don't have a lot of confidence in their protections, I would say. So I think they would prefer, if possible, right, to maybe not have, I mean, a huge portion of their historic inventory, separate from the historic districts, is in our new district that we're proposing, no matter how you draw it. And so there's definitely concerns from them about that reality and what it could mean for them and for historic assets in Reading. And we're trying to be sensitive to those concerns while still acknowledging that like a number of them are going to be included no matter how we draw the district. Potentially working with them on increasing their historical protections, working on their bylaws, reassessing their inventory. We've been discussing it with them and but that's where it came
That
from.
helps me understand, and
And my thinking is somewhat along that line, but I was saying, there's no reason why a historic property couldn't be made for, 3 or 4 families, particularly if it's in disrepair. But on the other hand, it gets into discretionary versus non-discretionary. You may want it to be discretionary to make sure that it's built out to maintain that historic setting. And so I'm just trying to say, I'm saying, is there a hybrid with that you could allow more higher density in those areas, but yet bring it back to CPDC to add the discretionary elements in?
so not necessarily by right.
Not necessarily by right.
That would probably relate more to like a sub-district overlay where you could have the same controls as our proposed zoning, but say this sub-district is subject to special permit. We wouldn't use it for MBTA communities compliance, but we wouldn't necessarily need to. So we could consider an option like that.
I'd hate to have a good historic house torn down to put up 20 units.
Agreed.
I agree.
Yes.
I think our question here is that we absolutely believe that whatever we present will be cut down, which we're prepared for, whatever district we present will be cut down ultimately through the process. We're debating if it's best to present these as 2 options and let people debate between them, or just start with the smaller one and let people cut down from there. I think that's kind of how we're debating what is the best use of the process and our time. And one of the
cut down?
you can cut down a lot.
Yeah,
So the smaller proposal is 300 plus acres. The larger proposal is 570 acres.
And we-
Is the smaller, which one on your screen
so
is?
this is the smaller one on the right.
It says option 1, option 2.
So this is the smaller one that we had come up with. This stays the same in both proposals. This is left out, this is left out, and up here is left out as well. So we could likely shrink somewhat downwards. We could pull from Eaton to John Street, but we thought that getting to match our industrial boundary made sense, and capturing some of the lots over here made sense. And up here, I could probably even look, if I wanted to shrink this down, just get rid of up here and make that same connection again over here, because this matches A40 in business A that we'd be looking to overwrite. So there is room to come down a little bit, but the smaller you get, the harder it becomes to find those natural boundaries and without it looking
Well,
odd.
let me throw out one other thing and see if it makes any difference with anybody else. One of the things that I think would be a good idea is to say, this is hypothetically, the times have changed, to say that whatever is picked out, we have a renewed look at it 2 years later down the road. And if some area is heavily hit, we then take the steps to remove it from the area and to pick in one of the other areas that's maybe pink and not inside the circle. And it might be a way of basically of people thinking that if my neighborhood really gets hit, I don't have to move out because I don't like it, but I know, I may have it pulled out.
I mean, what we want to do, we could certainly do that, but we want to do something now that meets the long-term vision and understanding that there is gonna be subject to some change in whatever area we propose over the course of time without having to go back, because I guess how we see it is that future phases, and whether that's from the state or locally or other, that future phases are only going to expand similar concepts outwards towards single family zoning. So where's our starting point, I guess, is how we see it.
So are you expecting at the workshop that when people see a map, they'll dig right into immediately tweaking the line, those lines?
So at our first workshop,
I do,
absolutely.
I do, that's why.
Am I in or out?
I'm such a, yeah.
And so there's also the potential for, you know, when people come and they know the neighborhood, there may be places where they expand it out. And
Right.
I'm not going to be specific here, but you know, and this is getting to a very granular level, but have you looked at areas like along your boundaries where there may already be existing multifamilies? And that, so therefore, it may make sense for a
yeah.
line to cover both sides of the street, not just one side of the street, because of existing homes that could be readily converted to a 3-family.
That's one of those things I was gonna say, and I think I mentioned it before, is I don't think, you know, just from a neighborhood development cohesion standpoint, I don't think having the zoning line between a multifamily and a, you know, single family sort of, right, a zone be down the middle of the street.
Right, I agree.
Because, right, like, why could they do it? Right, two things. Why does that neighbor get to redevelop their house and I can only do
I
single
have to
family?
look at it, but
Right,
I don't
and
get to do it.
right, and they have all the parking and I don't, and they're, right, they're taking I think in the long run, that creates a problem versus just moving the zone back one,
To the lot.
back to the lot, so that the frontage,
Rear lot.
so yeah, the rear line of that, whatever's fronting on that.
Yeah.
That's one thing that I really think that we ought to do, just from how this all gets built out. The other thing, I guess I have a couple questions on whether you have the data, whether you have the information. One is, I would hate for us to develop a zone that that pushes the opportunity or the disruption of construction all on lower value neighborhoods. And excludes those, you know, those ones that are, you know, that are, have a higher value. So making sure that we're not doing something to create more inequity in town, I think we really owe it to take a look. I don't know what data we might have to look at that, but I think that is something we really need to look at. And then the other thing that I was thinking about is, like, you know, just sort of knowing some of these neighborhoods a little bit. Like, I think that right, when you were talking about the sort of the setbacks and all of that, right? And we're talking about the train station or you know, in my mind, I am thinking, and I'm not picking on them, but like, I'm thinking, oh, Arlington Street, you know, like along Woburn, or like, right, I'm thinking, or the neighborhood down, you know, or around Mount Vernon, like, that's what I'm thinking about. And to me, a lot of that housing stock, you know, if you were to build out to those dimensions, wouldn't really change the neighborhood, because a lot of those structures are. But if I go down to, I'm just picking, you know, Fairview, I think, right? Victoria Ave, Fairview, like Sunnyside Ave, that whole neighborhood. Like, those are probably a fairly dramatic change, and sort of in the way I'm thinking about it. And so the reason why I'm going down this is, like, do you have any data on what the existing density is, and I don't know if that's the right thing, but like, how close is the existing development to the potential, right? in some of these neighborhoods, because I think in some neighborhoods, it would be a fairly drastic change, and I'm right, I'm thinking about this more of the how much pushback, which isn't really the right way to think about it, but right, like how dramatic is that a change? And it may make sense that, you know, you can evolve development in some neighborhoods that are mapped on here easier than others.
Yeah.
Both in terms of getting it through, but also just in how the neighborhood evolves, right? So.
Yeah,
I have a couple more. One is going back to your first point. I just underscoring. I think we should include in the zoning the full street. I also, on the first map, there were some blocks that included not just both sides of the street, but otherwise split the block in the middle. I also think we should avoid, other than like that first row of homes on a house and catching both on both sides of the street, so like both sides of Prescott or both sides of other streets there, avoiding having the zoning line be otherwise just kind of like in the middle of the street, cause it's like, why does my neighbor get to do that and I don't?
like I don't like these lot lines, they're a bit wonky, splitting through Grand and Deering. But otherwise, like, I guess when we're looking at roads, it, as a natural boundary, it meant going all the way up towards Willow and Lowell and trying, so we're trying not to go too big, but if we are gonna focus more on surrounding lots and neighborhoods, then we could probably rework this a bit to
And then
Yeah,
on map
it's
2, and maybe John, this may have been part of what you were saying, I'm not sure, but it does kind of stick out as a sore thumb, this pink area that is like right across the street from the train station.
I know.
I mean, if our objective is to get a multifamily housing near the train station, let's find a place to include that, even if we're not including the historic district for one reason or another.
Yeah, I think the question there was if we're drawing on center lines, how do you include that area? And if you're saying don't draw on center lines, then it becomes very easy to
I
include
don't
it.
think we should draw on center lines,
That's helpful.
and I think
Yeah,
that
but
cut you
I-
off,
but-
Tom, sorry.
Yeah, but I see what you're talking about, the difficulty of not drawing on center lines.
Right, I mean, it doesn't look as nice on the map, but like, it helps, and I mean,
Yeah.
you know zoning board too, it just,
Right, like don't, and I think I said
it's
this,
explained.
don't get stuck on what it looks like on the map,
Yeah.
because it really matters more. It maybe look horrible on this map. What really matters is when you go out there and like,
And
this
you're
is the
walking down the
neighborhood.
street,
Yeah, yeah, because, right, I love maps, I would do the same thing, right, like, but,
Now,
Well,
the-
we do that with aquifer maps a lot, because, you know, your aquifer is not a normal shape, but how do you define it? So you follow roads even though they're not in the aquifer.
yeah,
So I see the point, you need to have, you can't have zoning in on this street when the
Right,
neighbor
right
has the
across.
exact same house.
Yeah,
But I guess
yeah.
that's why we're trying to keep, if the form is substantially similar, even across the street, it's not, hopefully in some areas, a dramatic change across the street, so, but no, I think we can most certainly take that to heart and try to work around some lot lines in neighborhoods.
but back to your question, you're kind of looking for input on which of these maps.
Sort of, or do I, yes,
Should
so,
we present
or should I
both?
present
Should we
both?
present one?
Should I start large? Should I start medium?
I mean, I kind of like your idea, like, it's dramatic, and you say, like, this was what we could have, or we can, you know, cut it down to accommodate different things, so I mean, when I was looking at them, I was like, wait, what?
let's see, I'll give you one thought, let's see, I attended
Yeah,
two
you know,
of
the
the,
problem is the unit count, that's the
Yeah,
problem.
so,
What?
The
I
unit
guess-
count, the total unit count for the district is the problem.
right,
Because
so,
the unit count for the large district is 8,000 units.
And how many are we trying to get to again?
We need 1,500,
and so, but when you look at that 7,000 to 8,000 number,
it's not real.
it's not real because it's one, not accounting for existing units in the zone, and
Yeah.
two, it's looking again like, based on our proposal, it's gonna say, okay, if a 5,000 square foot lot can be accounted for, it's automatically like going up to the maximum, like we're not really like doing a build out analysis of individual lots, so that number is a bit over exaggerated. but admittedly, it's still a hard selling point when someone says, what's the unit capacity? And I have to say, well,
Yeah.
it's showing 7,000, and we have 9,900
Yeah.
existing units, so for
In all
me
of
to say
Reading.
I'm gonna double the housing units in this zone, which in reality is not going to happen, but on paper it looks that way,
Even the small one is 5,000.
right?
And we know we're gonna get this question and we know we're gonna have to say it out loud in the meeting because we've already gotten it in previous
The
meetings,
smaller one is how many?
5,000. And we know that as soon as we say it, that's,
So what's your,
But I'm sorry.
go, no, go ahead.
So, but is that it, right? And I know, right, I know this paper, right?
yeah.
But like, I'm just looking at these, like the units here on John Street, right? They're the biggest units, I mean, the biggest lots in the district, I think.
They're so long.
But they're, right, the whole back half of them, Tony, correct me if I'm wrong here, right? The whole back half of those is all wet,
Yeah,
right?
probably.
So in the paper exercise, do those count as being able to have,
That land is deemed sensitive and it's excluded from,
gotcha,
same for town-owned land and open space, it's all
all of that is,
reduced out of your
So
district, acreage.
I think having two maps for the presentation has the benefit of doing exactly what we're doing here, of spurring conversation on the comparison and why one way
Yeah.
and not the other, as opposed to just a single map, then people do focus on like the line and what should be included, but there are two different approaches here, and that probably spurs some rich discussion. It's like, so what's your answer to the question of why is the smaller one 5,000 units when we only need 1,500? You may not have the answer now, but you should probably be ready with
There's a
the
few,
answer.
like one thing is that we did receive specific requests from many departments to kind of locate zoning and kind of what think of as like each of the 4 quadrants. And as soon as you do that, you're at a minimum of 200 acres, right? We're proposing in the small one 300. There's still room to cut it back, but by the time you've placed part of our zoning district in each of those quadrants, you're at 200 acres.
So part of it is that equity to get at
Yeah.
all areas around the train station.
Here's a question for you. I attended both the meetings, and it seemed to me that those people that spoke were in favor of making the area encompass the entire circle. That's what it seemed. Now, how would you answer, I'm looking at option 1 right now, how would you answer why there are substantial segments outside the circle? You could answer it maybe by saying, but that's where some parks are located.
We did receive feedback during the mapping exercise. People were much more inclined to go farther north than farther south, and specifically cited the presence of parks, actually.
Okay.
Not
See,
everyone,
but I think that's the type of thing you need to
Yeah.
anticipate.
Yeah.
The only thing is, I think, I agree with you that I don't have any problem with 2 maps, but I would cover in a little bit more turquoise, bluish, whatever the color is, I'm a little colorblind, closer to the railroad station on Woburn.
Over here on this one.
Yeah. I would-
But I don't have a problem with you enclosing either one, it just, just as long as you've got, I think like the parks is a defensible argument. Or comments from people about extending it over there.
And I also think like, yes, I think it's important that we include like the lot lines, Prescott, both sides of it, but when you're getting over to Lowell Street there, like I don't think it's extremely important to include that corner, which is already a multifamily there, and like some of those other zones,
Yeah.
because it's like a natural
yeah,
boundary.
right?
That's like a hard
Yeah,
break.
Lowell
That's a
Street
hard
is a
break.
different thing,
Yeah.
right? One side of Lowell Street is not the same neighborhood as the other side, and in fact, a lot of things, right? School districts break on Lowell Street, right? So Lowell, I agree, like Lowell Street is a different animal, as would be, right, Main Street.
Main Street.
Main Street's a
Yeah.
different animal, right?
Well, that has the business
Yeah,
on it.
Middlesex is not. It's-
Right, that's just,
Middlesex
that's
is-
Yeah,
just
that's
all
just
the
a,
neighborhood,
yeah,
yeah.
it's just a neighborhood.
And there are
And I would argue that
multifamilies or
Woburn,
former multifamilies right on the other side of the street.
right, and I
Yeah.
would argue that Woburn, even though it is kind of a, you know, a strong pathway through, I think both sides of that one need to be.
I agree.
Yeah.
What about summer?
Summer? Are we
I
even in?
would do
Some-
both sides.
You would do
Summer's
both
not
sides, so
summer.
to me, summer again
Or-
gets
or-
back to
or-
historical homes, and I've tried to.
So, or
well,
don't do summer at all.
Yeah, I could actually see bringing,
down.
stepping one
One back.
off of summer, so summer
Yeah.
isn't part of it.
Sunny side.
I'm not as familiar with down there.
No,
I don't know either.
The south side had a lot greater variety in the maps that were drawn than the north side did.
Yeah, and
Both is.
I mean, I guess it gets
is.
to your point about equity and what it means of where we're zoning
Yes,
it, and admittedly, a lot of these are the smaller, more naturally affordable lots than the new single-family development we've seen on the northern side of town with subdivisions meeting today's standards and high home sales prices and right-of-ways. And so your point is duly noted that we shouldn't focus, I guess, specifically on like existing character or sizes that should naturally make sense, so.
Back on summer, I think if somebody raises summer, that gives you the answer. Well, there are two diagrams. You know, covering one inside the historic district, the other outside. But I still, you know, in my mind, think that it's not a problem to have a historic property have higher density so long as the historic structure remains.
yes, exactly, and that there should be,
And maybe
there
I
should be
like-
strong requirements for that, yeah.
Exactly.
I don't know whether everybody would agree with it, but, you know, you talked about a second district or something like that. I mean,
Mhm.
it doesn't bother me.
No, I mean, sub-districting isn't something, or it's a totally different zone, it's not something we've typically done. It's more familiar with overlays than it is underlying zoning, but I can take a look into that, so.
Well, you've done that in option two, really.
Right, and would you,
Yeah.
and like, when you're thinking of the historic district, that's kind of to the west part of Summer, whereas like the east
Mhm.
side seems to be more, like east
Mhm.
of Woburn seems to have those big houses and bigger
Yeah.
lots, but.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, this gets to probably like then the design, there's, yeah, the historic district, sure, that is a district that has been established, and so there should be more stringent standards. But there are a number of old, actually really beautiful properties that are sometimes two families or have
Yeah.
historically been
Yeah.
two families, and I would really aim for our design requirements and guidelines to, as much as possible, retain that rather than just having them be torn down and turned into apartment buildings. Yeah,
Agreed.
Or, yeah.
I think we can work.
to the extent that we
Yeah,
can
yeah.
and still be meeting the law, yeah.
Yeah, I think between design guidelines or parameters and looking with historic at their regulations, we can do a lot there.
Has anyone, I guess, I'd be surprised if it doesn't come up that, right, since this is called MBTA communities, right? And I do think, right, so there is a tie-in with commuter rail here. It seems to me like when I start to think about Knollwood,
Mhm.
that's a
Sounds
long
strange.
walk.
It's about
Right.
7 minutes if you go down Main and.
Is it?
It is,
Is it? So I guess my
That's-
question was, my question was, do we should sort of understand what the walk distance
Mhm.
is
Yeah,
from
that's-
sort of the
Yeah.
far extent, because that may be, right, I mean, if you're beyond 10 minutes,
Mhm.
you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah,
And
we had done
so-
it a while ago, and all those cul-de-sacs in that section that point south instead of north, they were just outside the original walk radius. Can't remember what we looked at, maybe it was
Yeah,
10
I
minutes?
think it was like
Yeah.
10 minutes.
10 minutes, yeah.
I mean, even the walk from over by Hunt Memorial Park over to the train station, that's, I think that's more than 10,
It's a ways.
it's a ways.
Yeah.
It's almost exactly 10.
Is
No,
it?
it's
Okay, oh,
exactly
really,
that,
okay.
Yeah.
I walked it down.
Oh, to downtown, but I was thinking about all the
To
way to
the train station,
I was
the
like,
train
to the train
station,
station,
yes.
yeah.
It's
Okay.
a 20-minute walk, my house, down by Hunt, back to Maine and back down.
But
Are
where
you a
would-
fast
how about
walker?
over to the train station?
Over the train station, right, there's
I start
another,
at my house, I go out to Hunt, back to Maine, back to my house.
The
So
longest time is crossing Main Street and sitting
Yeah,
there
yeah,
waiting for
exactly.
ambulances, so.
Especially if you're waiting for the light in
Yeah.
Washington. No, wait. Sorry, wrong discussion.
So, I guess what I'm thinking is, I probably can't change these maps in time for the workshop on Wednesday, so I can show them as is. Yeah, we can ask and we can
Yeah.
try, but
yeah,
The one thing, if you can, the one thing I would change is fill in some of that pink
yeah.
in that
On
area,
Woburn.
cause that looks,
Yeah.
it just sticks out like a sore
It
thumb.
doesn't make sense.
It doesn't
Yeah.
make sense, right?
Yes, it,
You could take it like right up to the historic district
Exactly,
where
yeah.
Temple
Yeah.
turns
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
or something like that. Catch
Yeah,
those
I mean, a
first
big
rows of
portion of
bluebird.
this area is trying to capture the two existing A40s, like regardless, they're gonna change their zones, but we'd like to capture them if we can, rather than just keep them their individual pockets of multifamily segmented from the single family surrounding it, but we
Yeah. At the end of, I don't know if we explicitly said this, but at the end of this process, A40 will no longer exist. So any of the odd remaining
Right.
like existing kind of chunks will also just all change to our new district,
and I guess
even if they aren't directly included
Right.
in the map.
You know, and for that one, so I'm gonna get a little bit prescriptive here. I mean, if your objective here is to show what it looks like excluding the historic district, you can do both sides of Woburn, you could do both sides of Prescott, and you have kind of like a little, anyhow, do both sides of Woburn, both sides of Prescott, all the way up to Summer, and you're still excluding the historic
Good
district, and that gives you a chunk.
agreed.
One final question. Would anything in the blue lines start to approach Walker's Brook Drive, and you get some on Bolton Street? Is any of that going to be in that study area that's being looked at, or to be looked at?
So the Walker's Brook Drive corridor study, it's not really doing traffic counts right now or projections because we have that data, so we could, I think if that's your question.
Well, my question is there going to be anything that we would be doing that might interfere with that study?
I don't
It hasn't
think so.
taken place yet.
I don't think so. That study is really promoting or looking at Walker's Brook from John Street down south, and in the end, I almost, now that I'm thinking about it, feel that this zoning really kind of looks to more capture that pedestrian atmosphere that we're trying to get pedestrian safety and improvement down
Yeah.
Walker's Brook, and if we have housing surrounding that to support that people can come from and go to, that's an important element. So it's how we've looked at the industrial zone and business A. You want to support them from their rears and their outsides and their boundaries so that people can easily get to them from their housing. So that was a big portion of our discussion at the workshop and part of this mapping. Importantly, to Mary's point to the A40, there is a small portion of business A up here down by the gas station that would just be overridden with the new multifamily zoning, likely in either mapping concept or any mapping concept. So that just becomes more of a non-conforming use that's subject to other restrictions if and when it were to change. I hope that's not an issue. I think it's an area that we feel is a bit odd for business A, but
It's the only
There was a-
non-residential.
Last year, there was an economic forum that talked about the area between Ash Street and the tracks in
Mhm.
Walker's Brook, with redevelopment for combination of mixed use and residential. Should that be included?
so we got a few asks specifically mostly on this kind of area of the industrial and why it's really not being included. So, and importantly to the point of like what others are doing with their downtowns and why aren't we doing it we feel that all of these commercial zones warrant their own discussion, and we did also simultaneously with our grant for this work receive a grant to look at the industrial zone and look at doing some zoning testing and uses of what people might feel comfortable with there, and kind of picking apart the industrial zone of, is housing a desirable use in that area? Is mixed use actually viable, both from a use desire and build out standpoint? So that grant is really going to focus in a bit specifically on that Eastern Gateway and Market Basket areas, and should the results of that conversation say, hey, we want the other side of Ash Street or on Meadow to capture this multifamily zoning because it's a natural kind of growth towards industrial, then great. And if it's something else, so be it, and we'll look at it then in more merit, but we're leaving industrial out for that conversation.
Was it the conversation about that industrial is to have it even a higher, like, more density, or like the bigger, not the 6 and under units, but more of the
In the
bigger
industrial,
units?
yeah, I would think so, but there's also elements of like the industrial zone directly abuts Ash Street where there's single family residents, so not all of the industrial zone really should be a promotion of 4+ story buildings, so we feel that sub-districting or some sort of parameters around like stepping out towards Walkersbrook makes the most sense.
We wouldn't feel, this is a presumption, right? I guess I'll say this. I'm not sure we're to a point where we understand what we want there in that industrial zone to be able to establish a by right use,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's giving it away.
Have a little control.
Yeah, that's giving it away then and there forever, right? And I don't think that we're there because we have so little commercial property, right? I mean, that's essentially where we are right now, right?
Yep, exactly, so we'll get there sometime in 2024, we'll start that conversation.
Yeah. Which is too bad, right? If we had our sort of thinking better on that industrial zone and it might fit in with, but it might not.
Right, so.
Yeah, we wanna, it'd be nice to consider the industrial holistically and the
Yeah,
sub-district and
yeah.
possibilities there, rather than saying, let's just carve out a chunk now.
Right.
It's hard to imagine what we would envision there that could be done by right.
Yeah.
So, different.
Keep on saying one final question. The 459 Main Street that we talked about, it's in blue here, green here. I suppose if we're located in blue, would it count towards additional housing or not?
No, cause it's in
The
40R.
zone.
Right, so again, the zoning doesn't care about what's built or what exists, it would be considered of like, does that lot achieve our minimum standards, and I wouldn't cherry pick that lot out of there just for this.
No, I'm not saying do it, but I'm just trying to figure out what counts and doesn't count. Okay.
So anything outside of the blue is not being submitted for compliance and testing. Anything in green we are not touching or changing because that's our smart growth zone, and we've even left split zone lots that are between DSGD and S15. We've kept them split for the time being because getting into the discussion of the DSGD and eating into it or expanding it at the same time to cover those lots is a discussion I'm not really in favor of having, so.
One more final one, then I'll shut up. With all these additional units going in, I think the law says you can't require any percentage to be affordable, but they could be affordable.
So.
But this, what's our contemplation there? Because if these get built out, it'll put our numbers way out of whack.
So you can have some elements of inclusionary zoning in this for what we're looking to promote for development. The units counts don't really work for affordable restricted development, and whether that's 3 or even sometimes upwards to 20, you really need higher dense higher buildings to achieve affordable housing and restricted units in them, even 10% that we would be looking at for like a zone or use like this in inclusionary, it wouldn't be as high as 25% of the 40R is. It would be between 10 to 20%.
Is
We don't
there,
think it's viable for these
do we
types of
plan to
uses.
do anything as part of this? I think it sounds like no, but is there a way to encourage some affordable housing?
I think any encouragement would be outside of the zoning and could come from your trust fund or CPA or other avenues that directly promote funding to secure and develop those resources, but the zoning, I'm gonna say no.
Because I envision a lot of these units are gonna be smaller. You know, under 1,000 square feet in some cases, I would think.
Yeah, so it's more about that naturally affordable stock, and many research and much research shows that as you develop more market rate units, your rents and prices generally tend to come down or average their way down to be more naturally affordable. So deed restricted just is an element that it's hard, it's needed, and we should continue to look for it in other areas, whether that's downtown, business A, industrial, wherever, whenever. It's just it adds a lot of elements to it in terms of wait list, restricting people, and so it's just a different avenue that again isn't really viable for this use zoning concept.
I've heard from some people that they think it would be easier to pass if it had an affordable component to it. So that's something that we've been thinking about. I think if we do go with the density units per acre that we're planning on presenting, there's like a small chance we could squeak it in, but it
Right.
wouldn't be it's not gonna be super viable. People won't really use it that much.
So when we talk about deed restricted affordable SHI units, we want them in areas that make sense in development, that makes sense or is going to be utilized by developers. But it is an important effort because as we continue to build our denominator and housing stock, we have to build more affordable housing. So it's kind of a balance.
Is that, you're saying we could do that because
Larger lots.
because we're gonna end up, right, on paper with a bigger zone than we need to under our requirements. So maybe we could peel some of those back that don't need to comply.
I think it's
Is
more
that-
about if we want inclusionary, if we do the density, which it sounds like we do, that potentially on larger lots, either lots of a certain square footage or lots of a certain unit count trigger an affordable requirement, like anything an acre and above as a 10% unit requirement. If we're looking at 22 acres, maybe it's your 2 affordable units in there, maybe that's viable, but it's still a tough sell given some of the other dimensional controls, I think, so.
There might be a way with rental affordance. But the biggest problem for anybody wanting to do that, if you're a landlord, let's say, is I don't want to have to do all the paperwork. So you gotta get around that and figure out how there might be some way to do the paperwork and check for qualifications each year and all that kind of stuff. But I'll get some additional thought to it.
I'll give it some more thought now that we know we like to propose the density, and we'll see maybe if it can work out on paper.
The way you get people to use it is if it's like an incentive, right?
Right.
So, but I think the
Yeah.
challenge for us is that we really don't wanna incentivize people to exceed the lot coverage or to
Right.
exceed the
The
height or
stories,
to exceed
yeah.
those things. And that's where the kind of like, how do you write it if you really don't want people to exceed the dimensional controls we're putting in place? Do you just let them exceed the density and say
Right.
you just have to fit them in the same size?
Well,
So that's kind of the challenge we've had with it.
And part where I
thinking
was
about it.
coming from is, I don't know how your assessor works in Reading, but usually when you go to rental properties, it's based on the rental stream and not the value of the unit. And that might be an incentive. Because if you build more, it's gonna be, the assessor's gonna get it, they're gonna say, well, now you had 1 unit, now you got 3 there, and your taxes are gonna go up.
So due to tax structure and not in zoning.
It might be naturally in there.
No.
Depending on how the assessor assesses value for rental units.
They're really looking, we'll look into it. Assessing is a different world.
Can we link a payment to the affordable housing fund? Per
Again,
unit?
it would have to be a payment in lieu of an affordable unit, so if those affordable units aren't being required or promoted with density bonuses or other, then like there's no payment in lieu to happen. So we can't really say like, oh, you're building 4 units, please contribute X dollars to our affordable housing trust fund. Like, it doesn't really work that way.
So, right, the only way that it really comes into play is we're going back to if someone comes and puts a number of properties together and amasses a property that could build more than 8 units. Let's
I'd say more than 12 at minimum.
maybe there's been some indication that it could do a little bit less than that, but let's
At
yeah.
10%, yeah.
Yeah,
you could
yeah,
probably do a
Let's
little
just
bit,
say,
yeah.
8 to 10 units, and it maybe, right, that's where that cap starts to come in, right? I mean, we did say, we were talking about before about the 22 units per acre versus 6 units total. If they, 22 units per acre, but anything over 10 units needs to provide,
Right.
but affordable units. Would that happen? I don't know.
Right.
But that also gets into that discussion about, right, like, will someone come in and, right, come in and amass like bigger,
Right.
bigger properties, and there would be some disincentive to do that, but if someone did do that, then at least there's something in it for the town.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know what those numbers are, but maybe that's,
Yeah.
and if we don't necessarily need that, that extra,
Step.
yeah,
Yeah.
the-
Yeah. Let me look.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's more achievable with the density, so we can start looking into it a bit more heavy-handed. And lastly, the last thing we shared probably in the drive today was just a text of the zoning bylaw that highlighted some of the areas that are likely up for amendment. And because we're doing underlying zoning, it just spans a number of sections, and our bylaw isn't really set up to be so conducive so as to, like, a lot of bylaws have their zone and almost like an overlay describe the whole zone and their parameters in one. Ours does not do that, so we have to kind of jump around a lot, which adds some trickery to elements and whatnot. And so but most of the areas are highlighted. We've highlighted a lot of the dimensional controls with no other definitions that needed to change, but most of it will probably come down to, like, I think our table of dimensional controls is gonna kind of try to be proposed as is, like, not try to play with it too much more. But when we get to finessing language of, like, requiring street trees or payment in lieu of street trees or landscaping front yards and side yards and screening parking, a lot of that will come into play at the public hearing side of it, where we're like really wordsmithing and getting into it. But we wanted to give you a heads up as to some of the sections that we're preliminarily looking at for amendment. We won't scroll through that whole thing tonight.
Nothing better than zoning language.
Just thrilling stuff.
Some of us love it, so.
Especially when it's late.
Your comments
Yeah.
were very
Look, it's almost
Clear.
midnight.
It is, yeah,
But it's not.
It is.
yeah.
And if you feel like we missed a section, feel free to highlight it and send it my way. Get it in there. Other than that, I'm good for the night. for you guys there.
Motion to adjourn.
Second,
All those in favor?
Thank you all.
done.